Hello, everyone, and welcome to FCI Live 2026. This is our second day of sessions, and for those of you, of course, watching the videos, um, doesn't matter which day it is, but thank you for being here with us. We had a phenomenal first day, and today we're going to spend some significant time talking about GMs and the GM crisis. So this is called Solving the GM Crisis. Before we get started, I just want to real quickly thank, and this is the wrong slide, thank our champion sponsors. These are the sponsors that really make the whole series possible. So thank you to Frontier Co-op, Cabot Creamery Co-op, who is a champion sponsor for the first time ever. Thanks so much to them. And National Co-op Grocers. Frontier and National Co-op Grocers have been huge supporters of the series from the very beginning. Thank you guys so much. So we're here today to discuss this little thing called the GM crisis. And I know this topic goes far beyond startups. We had so much interest from startups, GMs of established co-ops who reached out and said, would this be useful to me? I think this is a good conversation. I actually had one GM write back and say the title of the email said was that the GM crisis is real. And the response was, oh yeah, it is. And that was the entire email. So it's a well-known fact that we're struggling with the GM role, the GM and how it works in our co-ops and how it's sustainable for the people who fill it. And so we have with us today this conversation really started in earnest at Up and Coming 2025 in Kalamazoo. And Bonnie and Steve were part of that conversation, and a really amazing community conversation happened. And from that, some starting efforts on how we address this have started to move forward. And they're here to share with us today what they learned in that session, describe the situation, and what right now is being done about the situation. So I am very excited to have here Bonnie here with us from the Firebrand Cooperative, and also to have Steve Cooke here, who was the founding GM of Friendly City Food Co-op and is actually our board president, board chair at FCI. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having us, JQ. Hey, startup and established food co-op rock stars. Good to be here. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
We can. It's kind of not in full mode, I don't think.
Okay.
But we're seeing your notes, but we can see it.
I got rid of the notes. I'll make it bigger.
There you go.
Better?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. So, JQ gave us a great tee up in that the goal of today's session really bubbled up from the co-creation session at Up and Coming, which was a packed room full of startup organizers, established food co-op GMs, startup general managers, representatives from National Co-op Grocers, representatives from Food Co-op Initiative, people who had been working in co-ops for 30 plus years, right? It was a very hot topic for a reason. And we're going to go into that a little bit today. We're going to share what came out from that, share some kind of follow-up conversations. And then we have an amazing general manager in the house with Steve Cooke. So I'm going to ask him some questions. Like, part of this is like, what are the hats GMs wear? Is this realistic, right? So we're going to dig into it. Feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat, your own observations. I see some rock stars from recently opened startup food co-ops, right? So this is, at the top of your mind as well, I know. So we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves, talk about what our plan is, and then dive into it. So I will start. I'm Bonnie Hudspeth, she, her pronouns, and I'm an independent consultant with Firebrand Cooperative. I also serve as a trustee for Cooperative Fund in the Northeast, and we have been investing in supporting startups since 1975 in the Northeast region of our country. I served for 13 years supporting startup and established food co-ops around the Northeast. So had a lot of interactions with general managers, mentorship, trying to help startups find general managers. So this is really near and dear to my heart. And then I also started my own food co-op in Keene, New Hampshire with a community effort. In 2013, we opened our doors. The co-op is thriving and expanded. And I started off working as like a co-op, a volunteer worker with my parents when I was little, repacking peanut butter. That doesn't happen so much anymore, thank goodness. Back at my home co-op in Burlington, Vermont, City Market or Onion River Co-op. I'm going to pass it over to Steve.
Hey everyone, my name is Steve Cooke. I'm the general manager of Friendly City Food Co-op in Harrisonburg, Virginia, about 2 hours southwest of DC. We've been in operation since June of 2011, and I've been the GM here since about 10 months before that happened. As JQ mentioned, I'm also the board chair of Food Co-op Initiative. And before I got to Friendly City, I had been the general manager of Seven on the Natural Foods Market in Atlanta. And before that, I was the executive chef. I did have some natural foods uh, grocery store background, but I wasn't in any kind of I was a deli manager, so I wasn't a general manager before I took over as general manager at Sepananda. What else do you want me to say, Bonnie?
That's it. Steve, I emailed Steve and was like, anything else you want to add to my bio? And I misread executive chef to be executive chief. I was like, that's what we're calling it.
No.
And that's like such a good lead into this topic to be like, what the heck is a general manager role? What do they do? You could have easily been executive chef, executive chief. So great tee off to the topic at hand. Um, so our plan for today is to give you a little recap from the up and coming GM crisis session, dig into a little bit more on why is this a crisis. We could probably have an open conversation. Y'all could tell us why it's a crisis because you're living it, right? Or you experience it yourself. We're going to talk a little bit about what are the roles that a general manager could play, is expected to play, right? And then chat through finding your general manager. Steve's going to talk about pinch points. He framed it up this way. I'm like, yes, I love it. Where are the pinch points? And then finally, we're going to talk about how do we address this crisis. This is a challenge and crisis for our entire movement, and it requires an all of us solution. And we're going to talk about kind of the different components of what is in play right now. And you're going to be a part of that solution. So I want to give credit to Nina Aurora Rowland for putting together this PowerPoint from a co-creation planning session up and coming. This is a very high level synopsis, so you can hear, if you were not in that room, what came out and that what led to further conversation. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we're going to dive into it, but just sharing that this is what came up at Up and Coming was something that we had been talking about in various circles. JQ and I, staff, FCI staff, I've been talking to general managers for the last 20 years. They've been saying these things, right? So it's bubbling up all over. But really, we're calling it a crisis because of the lack of available general managers with experience. We're calling this a crisis because of the board general manager relationship, and we're going to talk more about why. We are calling this a crisis because the lack of support for building up the bench of future general managers in the pipeline. I don't really like that word, but the pool of potential general managers for the movement for both established food co-ops, right, who are seeing a huge wave of retirement from brilliant general managers and thinking about how do we find GMs for our open stores that are 50, 60 years old, and then also for the startup movement. So it really is a national movement crisis. And then work-life balance, that's a really cute way to say the expectations for general managers are unreasonable. And what are we going to do about that? So we're going to dig more into what a GM does, but this was fun to actually write out on paper and get brainstorms from the room. And this isn't even all of it. Like there's roles, there's skills, and there's personal attributes, right, of what's required. This is the beginning of the list. That's why you see those little the asterisks or the dots at the bottom to be like, oh, this is the tip of the iceberg, right? We probably aren't covering things. So you can see like engineer, right? Did you know that some general managers step into the role of engineer and maintenance and facilities? They cover deli, they cover front end. They're the CEO, COO, CFO, CMO. Okay, we should do a freestyle about this. They are responsible for co-op support representative relationships. That means, right, with National Co-op Grocers, if you are lucky enough to be a member, with infra, with anyone that you were working with in the support, and board management, stakeholder management. That alone could be a full-time job for someone, right? So we're going to talk more about this, but these were some of the things that came up from the room at Up and Coming. Engineering, once again, there. I love that engineering keeps coming up, right? Performance management, risk management, leadership, people engagement, communications. That's a lot of skill set to expect from one individual human. So one of the things that came out of the up and coming session was thinking about, well, what does a path forward look like? And this was focusing on startups and focusing on, okay, well, are you going to have a general manager 2 years before opening? Likely not. Do you often require the skill sets that a general manager would have 2 years before open? Yes, you often do. Right? So there was creativity in the room. This was like a throwing pasta at the wall thing of like, how do we how do we plan better so that when a general manager is hired for a food co-op, that they're walking into an organization or moving into an organization that they've had an organizer, a project manager, they've had a construction project manager, they've had a store opening project manager that might not be them. How can we like have it so that they're not walking into expecting to do all of these things? So that was one kind of creative iteration that was bubbling up. Right? So that the idea of kind of like, could you stagger this and have an organizer project manager for every startup, a construction project manager, and then your general manager just has to open a store. That's it, right? No, and all the other things, right? But kind of like looking at the front loading of that as one piece of it. And we will go into kind of like there was a little bit of brainstorming of where could you find these people from within your community. That does not address the expectations for the general manager, even if they come into a cooperative where they have had a phenomenal owner's rep or project manager, phenomenal construction, and they're kind of coming in at the phase where they're building a store. There's still too much expected of them, right? But thinking about what are all the ways that we can make this more easeful and set them up to succeed. And so some of the tools for success that bubbled up from this session were shadowing general managers that at other co-ops, right? What are the things that could support general managers in their position? Thinking about the support organizations and training that could be offered. The concept called Train 2, which we're going to talk about with Steve. Steve is like doing this right now and kind of, this is a hope for how established co-ops can help address this crisis. And then another element is what does the board need for training for transition? And JQ and I are doing another session on this. Gabby's doing another session. There's a lot of sessions related to this. So you'll have more tools coming up. Okay. So just recapping why we're calling this a crisis. The job expectation is too much. It is too much. It leads to burnout, right? When you think about that list, those lists, which are not even comprehensive, right? The limited supply of competent food co-op general managers for both startups and established co-ops. The lack of a pool, because even if there are potential staff at food co-ops who could be mentored or trained into future general managers, right now has not been sufficient training and mentoring for that to happen readily. I think it is happening piece by piece at some co-ops, but we need it to be happening at every co-op pretty much for this to be, to be able to address this need. And then another element is making sure, thinking at the startup phase is like, how do we find the right general manager and build the right relationship with them to retain them? So what does the startup board need to be able to prepare themselves to be an excellent boss and to be able to work well and work cooperatively and work in a way that requires constant negotiation and relationship building with their general manager once they find them? So I want to ask Steve, we can post this, I will post this in the chat as well. But Steve, what is, a general manager is expected to wear many hats, and that includes kind of like competencies, skills, experiences, personal attributes. And I want to ask you, Steve, kind of to share a little bit about your experience. We just learned that you were the executive chef and then moved into being a GM.
Yeah.
Can you share a
Yeah.
little bit more about kind of like what that's like and then moving to a startup co-op?
Sure. I think kitchen manager or executive chef in a restaurant. Actually, I was executive chef at Seven Onda, so it was within the co-op. Um, as it turned out, that co-op in Atlanta has has the possibility of employees serving on the board. And I had actually just been elected to become a board director when the general manager gave her notice that she was resigning in 2 months, and we had to do a quick search for a general manager. I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but it was kind of a good thing that I had done that because part of board training was that I learned about how to read financial statements and things like that. So when I became the GM a couple of months later, that came in really handy, and I had to learn more and more about that. But um, I think a good place to start is when I got here or when I accepted the job at Friendly City Food Co-op, they gave me a list of general manager responsibilities during startup. That list included renovations and build out, and a long list underneath that, human resources, so setting up the staff and the structure and policy manuals, operations, making sure we had all the proper licenses and getting the right inventory for opening, pricing strategies, merchandising plans, all of that. Next thing was outreach and marketing. So being the face of the co-op, building on relationships with local businesses, seeking out opportunities in local media, a marketing plan, signage, store and shelf graphics, and other things like that. Other than that, work with the board to develop a policy register and assist with the board transition to policy governance, which they had not even started on. And then after opening, a whole new list of things, including planning, uh, preparing the annual business plan with capital, operating, and cash budgets, long range planning process, investigating new business opportunities, conducting negotiations as needed, finance, so looking at the finances, making regular financial analysis and reports for the board, monitoring deviations, operations, more operations things, ensuring compliance with all the laws, overseeing remodeling, repair, and maintenance. Outreach, working with the outreach staff on developing and projecting the co-op's branding, working with staff to plan and coordinate co-op sponsored events. Human resources. Even to this day, we don't have an HR manager here at my co-op. We've been in business almost 15 years now, and we're finally posting an ad to hire an HR manager here. So all of those things, ensuring adherence to the laws, fair policies, hiring and evaluating managers and other team members, ensuring operations and on-the-job training for all employees, all of those things. And that was just as a startup and in the first year or two of our operations. Everybody kind of thinks or assumes that the natural fit for someone to be a food co-op general manager is to look for somebody that's run like a chain grocery store. And the reality is that a manager of a chain grocery store manages labor, so they're controlling labor costs, they're doing scheduling and making sure that people show up on time and they have people to do the jobs that need to be done. The margins and all of the shelf tags and things like that come from corporate headquarters or come from headquarters, wherever that might be. Even if you're a small chain of a couple of stores, somebody else is doing that. Somebody else is doing all of the HR functions. You might be doing onboarding for people in your store. But the majority of those things, the merchandising, people come in and do that. I mean, you've probably been in a grocery store where there was somebody from Coca-Cola that was coming in and stocking things out on the shelves for you so that they get proper placement for those things in their stores. So that doesn't happen in a food co-op. If something goes on a shelf, somebody that works there is doing it. Most likely the general manager figured out the floor plan and the store planograms and things like that before the NCG started sharing those with us and other higher level organizations that are supporting us in those ways. But it's a lot. It's a lot for a general manager, for one person to do. Like this says multitasking in a mindful way, which like multitasking is one of those things that they say is a good way to not get anything accomplished. But almost every day when I'm sitting here at my desk, working on anything, I could be doing long range planning or trying to figure out a strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years that we're working on. there'll be a knock on my door, or somebody will just walk in because my door is open 90% of the time and say, hey, somebody's here to talk to you about blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, do they have an appointment? No, they don't have an appointment. They just thought they would come by. Or, hey, there's all of a sudden there's a hole in the floor in aisle 3. What should we do about it? And I go look, and sure enough, there's a hole in the floor of aisle 3. And we have to figure out some way to find a solution to that. Or the meat freezer is not working, and we have to call somebody and get them to come and do that. And they fix one part, and then another part that was connected to that is not working now because parts from the other part blew into the other part, and now it's clogged, and we have to replace that too. Anyway, so I'm kind of talking fast because it's a lot to cover, but it's a lot. It's just a lot, period.
It's too much, Steve. It's too much. And I think, in the chat, Dr. Angela, Financial Unity is like, wow, did you have time to sleep? Right? Like, take care of yourself to be sustainable, make this role sustainable for the long term. And Sheila from Long Beach Co-op is like, no pressure.
Yeah. I have a really good team now. I mean, the first year, any food co-op GM at a startup, the first year you're probably going to be there 7 days a week from open to close, and you are training and developing people. And ultimately, after a couple of months, you can take off for a couple hours in the middle of the day and come back for closing. But I was fortunate enough to hire some people that had been at other co-ops and could provide cover for closing shifts or opening shifts, and I could come in a little later in the day and kind of work the middle of the day. But it's still you're responsible for everything, and if anyone has a question, you're the one that knows all the answers. So you have to be patient and kind and generous in ways that don't come naturally to everyone, and especially when you're in kind of a high stress situation of a store that's been open a couple of weeks or a month, and all of the things that are going on all over the store, and everybody that works there is lined up to ask you questions about, how do I answer this? Where is this product? Do we sell this? Do we sell that? And it's a lot. You just kind of have to breathe and lean into your kind and generous soul, I guess.
And I think too, to your point, Steve, it's like, that is, how would you attract, who would sign up to do what you just described? Like,
Yeah.
right? And I think as a movement, some of what we've done is like not being real about it, right? Like, kind of as we're advertising the position, or not knowing. Like, when I was a startup project manager, I did not know what the general manager position entailed. Thought I had some idea because it looked seamless from the outside, right? And we're at a moment of reckoning, I think, in this movement of being like, this is not realistic to ask people to do this. So what does that mean? There's a lot of really incredible people that are organizing and at the table. And so what does this look like? How do we shift this so that it's not just, what you're saying, people that are willing to work 7 days a week, give up everything else in their life, and constantly evolve. And so there's a list that we can, that will be with this PowerPoint, that Colluminate worked to put together a GM success profile that talks about some of the competent, it's a list like Steve had. And it was, I'm sure it's in process of being updated too, because this one was more than 5 years old. So there's like a whole list of competencies like problem solving, developing talent, influence and persuasion, change management, business planning, finance. How would you go to school for this stuff, right? It's like, I don't even want to estimate how many jobs it is wrapped up in one. But I think it is useful, no matter what, for if you're a startup organizer, to look at this and be like, what are some of the skills and competencies and key experiences that they've pulled together to think about that a general manager needs to have, or should have some of
Yeah.
these, right?
Yeah. I do know a couple of other general managers who started out as kitchen managers or executive chefs. There is a little bit of overlap because I mean, you're sourcing the food that you're selling. You have people in the back of the house that are preparing the food, food safety issues, and things like that in the back of the house. And then the front of the house is all about customer service, and you have to be able to kind of find a peaceful way to manage the relationships between the front of the house and the back of the house, and night shift and day shift. I think hotel management, I mean, I haven't really thought about this in the past too much, but I think hotel management is kind of the same thing because you have lots of different cultures and classes of people working there and as guests in your hotel. And you really have to be able to keep JQ and I talk all the time about plate spinning. You have to keep all the plates spinning. And if you remember the old Ed Sullivan show, if you're if you're old enough, if you're not old enough, you should look up plate spinning. Just Google it, and you'll get a good idea of what we're talking about. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think retail background is good. Restaurant background from being a chef or a restaurant manager is probably a good kind of skill set to look for. Hotel management. Um, people can, I mean, people can come from lots of different backgrounds, but they have to kind of have this drive. And community organizing is probably another path that good GMs come from. I think really the ideal thing that we've discovered is people coming from another co-op. I had 10 years as a general manager at Sevenanda, which was an up and established co-op. When I got there, it opened in 1974, and I didn't start working there until the mid 90s. So it had a good track record and things were going on a good path. I kind of got to learn on the job, learn from managers that were there, how to do things. I also learned from my predecessor some things, how not to treat people and how to handle things. So there's some of that that comes with experience. And in my first 10 years at Sevenanda, I made a lot of mistakes and I learned from those mistakes. So by the time I got to Friendly City, I had a decade of GM experience under my belt, which is going to be hard to find something like that for a startup, maybe, but somebody that's got a couple of years as a store operations manager or something like that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, and I love getting to listen to you live, Steve, because it's like you're bringing out so many qualities. You're demonstrating so many qualities in yourself that are also key, right? Like the growth mindset. You're like, I made a lot of mistakes, right? That putting your ego to the side and being able to pivot and learn and grow is essential and is challenging because my experience from like living in many communities with food co-ops is that when the co-op is thriving, people are celebrating the co-op. When member owners are upset about something, they're like the GM, they will point fingers at you, right? So you're not going to get all the credit for things going well, and you will get all the flack for things not going well sometimes, right? So it's challenging to hold that space in a community. I'm seeing in the chat, first of all, love and appreciation for you from Berta saying she experienced firsthand the kindness and patience with everything you have on your plate. You still find time to hop on a call with me or come say hello with a warm smile whenever I visit. And I think that's another role we haven't even talked about that general managers do is principle six, they help and support the next generation of startup food co-ops, right? That's just part of like the movement perpetuation. Maggie Cohn from Cooperative Fund in the Northeast brought up you also have to be able to work under a board, right? And so that board could be 9 to 11 individuals that are working to train themselves up to be a cohesive, unified body that will be your boss. And with startups, that's going to vary a lot, like the training, the level of training and the understanding of delegation of authority, transitioning. JQ and I are going to be talking about this, and I think Abby too, transitioning from a governing board to this weird in between phase, which is really transitional. There is transitional phase that lasts for longer than we thought it did. When we're stepping back, you're in a transitional phase, and then it's going to take a year and a half right? Around that, then you can be governing, right? You're going working, transitioning, governing board, right? So there's a lot of pieces there. And the general manager has to weather that with you with patience and kindness and the goal to keep growing together, right? So that's a whole other thing that Maggie brought up that's really important. We're going to talk about it. Um, okay. I'm seeing, is there anything else? Do co-op stores need to consider additional support roles for the GM, at least a periodic interim basis, in order to set the GM up for success? What do you think, Steve?
Um, well, I'm not sure I understand what support roles. I mean, the put the GM and other give them other jobs to. I'm sorry, I'm misunderstanding.
Support for you, buddy. Support for you. Like, what are some other ways
Yeah.
that, like, additional support roles? And feel free I'm
Yeah, I mean, I think making sure if you're a board director at a startup or an existing co-op and I mean, the GM should be able to tell you or you can work together with them to identify what their gaps are in their skills and experience and knowledge base and make sure that they get training in those areas. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, imposter syndrome is sometimes a real thing with anybody in a leadership role in any kind of organization. And it's hard for some people to admit that they don't know how to do all the things. Like I said, when I was hired as the general manager at Seven Nanda, I just barely knew how to read an income statement and a balance sheet. So if there's things like that, and I mean, we're fortunate enough to be in a micropolitan area that has a major state university, and I could go take a business administration class or something at James Madison University or Eastern Mennonite and get some real experience. I did take a course on Excel so I could learn how to do spreadsheets and things like that. So, and that came in super handy. Um, yeah, I mean, all of those things are good. Doing the CCMI was a program that was going on before I got to be a general manager. And so I missed out on some of the Consumer Co-op Management Institute GM trainings that were going on. And now they're offering more of those kind of things with the NCG. And I mean, I've been doing this long enough that I'm not saying I couldn't learn something, and I do still ask a lot of questions of our support team with the National Co-op Grocers, other co-ops. We have a really great network of the co-ops that now all exist in Virginia, including Winchester, when we have things that we might share with them. Um, so the Mid-Atlantic co-ops and the Eastern Quarter GMs. So we do have a great support network um, for things like that. So
Thanks, Steve.
If I
Jake,
could just throw in here that real quick that startups are seeing this. I think the question is like we've seen co-ops where there's a finance committee and there's a transitional finance committee of board members who understand pro formas a lot better than the GM, who are helping them, who are meeting with them regularly to work through the financials, to understand the financials. Can you do something like that? Absolutely. If you have the strength and the talent on your team. We saw that at Fredericksburg. We've seen boards where there's an HR person who has a lot of HR background who comes in and helps out the GM on for like 5 hours a week every week with some basic HR stuff. We saw this at Oshkosh Food Co-op and the person had the background. So we won't go too far into it, but if that's the question, yes, we've seen this be very successful for startup food co-ops is a transitional phase to either get systems in place or to get skills in place for the general manager as a support to them with the full intention of handing it off to the general manager.
yeah, our partner credit union actually has a HR subsidiary service that they offer. I mean, you pay by the hour, but it's really super helpful if you need help putting together a personnel policy manual or writing job descriptions or things like that. They have templates and can help you work through the details on kind of those kind of things, and it's not crazy expensive.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and JQ for bringing that real life example of how boards are kind of like adjusting too to be like how do we offer more support in this transitional phase. So we it's not like we're putting a pin in it because we can't, but we're going to put to the side this one aspect of the crisis, right? Which is that we're asking too much. GMs need more support. This is something that exists and is true, and we need to keep innovating and figuring out how to make this a more manageable, sustainable position for more people, right? Not just Steve Cook. Um, and so the, the other piece of this is okay, well, you do need to find a general manager um, as a startup. Or, right, I'm seeing something in the chat around kind of like there are some, it's rare, but there are some models of kind of like shared management, co-management. That's a whole other topic we could talk about, right? But you do need to find a general manager. And so, Steve, if I were organizing my startup and was opening in the next couple of years or next year, what would be where would I look? What are the first things I would do to find a general manager?
We kind of were talking about it a little earlier. I mean, I think retail experience is key. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a grocery store. Grocery would be ideal, but I mean, there's food in lots of different retail operators now. And we talked about restaurants. There's other grocers. Drugstores sell food. Target sells food. Walmart sells food. Um, Other kinds of co-ops, at least that somebody would come with a co-op, a knowledge about the seven principles and how co-ops operate. Um, Nonprofits maybe, but that could require additional background or skills. Um, yeah, those are kind of where I would start looking. I mean, you might find somebody that I know some larger co-ops have hired from other organizations outside the list that I just mentioned, but yeah, it's kind of a yeah, wherever you can. Yeah, looking all of what it says here, your own social media and looking in your local community, other open food co-ops that are in your area or there, I think Illuminate has a job board that you can post on and try to attract somebody to come. I saw, and they posted. I had been following Friendly City Food Co-op on Facebook because I had gone to James Madison University here in town, and I saw that when they announced they were looking for a general manager and um, applied and got called for an interview. So. Um, all the usual job boards, Indeed, LinkedIn, whatever the places people go to find jobs in your community. There are, I mean, Illuminate and other organizations like that can help you with job searches, posting in all the right places. They're headhunters if you want to go that route. Um,
I would love to know more from JQ or FCI at some point about how well have recruitment firms worked. There have been a number.
Yeah, I know we were going to discuss this. Recruitment firms have not really panned out all particularly well. To be honest, the when we looked at the trends, they had definitely not panned out better for people than using general, online ZipRecruiter type stuff. That is actually been the most successful. And CB, yeah, it's a very high cost, and they do good work and they work very hard. But we just the overall outcomes over the last 6, 7 years of those who've used recruiters, those versus those have not, it's not justified the cost.
okay.
That's good to know. Okay, so Steve, what do you mean by pinch points in the process of your, finding a GM and then transitioning to bringing them on?
Well, I think there's a, I mean, there are times when the board some boards have a hard time letting go of operations after the store opens. um I think that the stage 5 that JQ and some others have put together is a great idea of there being a little bit more holding on, especially if you have a GM that didn't come from another co-op. Being able to and working with your the GM has to understand that the board's not going to let go of operations until they trust you. enough with their baby. This was their organization that they founded and created and raised a ton of money to put into operation and into business. They paid a bunch of money probably to hire you. Hopefully, they paid you a bunch of money as the general manager. Um, Boards have to realize that the GM has all these different hats to wear and do their best to support them without, you know, crossing a line into just being yes men for or yes people for whatever the GM says or trusting them too much. Um,
Yeah.
the board has to hold on to the authority and be able to delegate the responsibility. There's I think about the 7 habits of highly effective people and stewardship delegation, which is a lot like policy governance. He talks about the quarterback can't hand off the football to the running back and then run down the field carrying the football along with the quarterback or with the running back. You have to hand the ball off and trust them and let them run with it, but make sure that they have the proper blocking and all of the support that they need to do their jobs. Um, it's it's a lot. I think the hiring process is key, and I think a lot of I don't know. My sense is that some boards get to the point and they hire a general manager and they're like, take a big step back. I don't think that's happening as much now as it did in the past. JQ can talk about that more than I, but I mean, I think there's a real sense of relief when you hire a general manager that this person's going to do all the things now. And that's what I like about the stage 5 in this process is that the board still is responsible. They know the community better probably than the new GM that's come in, to have the connections, to know the network that can provide the support to the general manager, making sure that they have all the tools that they need. They know the people that they need, the network that they need to support a strong opening, connections to the farmers and the producers, the local business, downtown business associations, or things like that, if that's in your town, even if it's a county-wide organization. Making those connections is huge, and doing everything you can, especially if the GM is coming in from out of town. They need to get to know the community. You need to help them meet people and learn who to talk to when they have this issue or that issue, or if they just need a good friendly ear to talk to.
Yeah, and Steve, I think that's the perfect cue up for like this topic is covered in various ways in at least three, there's probably more of upcoming FCI live sessions, including stage 5 post-opening startup organizing. What does that look like? Who holds the power preventing GM burnout in startup co-ops, right? Very related to one piece of this. And then don't fling power, which is talking more about kind of like what you alluded to, Steve, which is kind of the yeah, how do you delegate? How do you effectively cultivate this transitional phase between when you're a working board and then you're not ready to just go working governing. That's not how it works. How we used to describe it that way as a movement. First you're working, then you hire your GM, you hold them the baby, then you govern. And that does
No.
not work out so well, right? And so we're going to talk more about that in an upcoming FCI live session. So, as we're getting to the last bit of this, how do we address this GM crisis? You're seeing that there's all of these layers to it, right? And so we're gonna share some examples of what are things that our existing co-ops are doing to try to address this crisis. What are things that support organizations, in particular national co-op grocers, um, FCI, right? We know FCI is kind of in this phase of kind of like looking at the stage 5 and looking at realistically, what is this transitional governance period? What is this? How do we navigate it? And then looking to you all, to us, the startups, right? Preparing to build the right relationship so that you can retain your GM. So this is back to Steve. We came up with this kind of like the concept of train two. Well, Steve came up with it and we just put a name to it, right? The concept of training two which involves intentional mentorship and training for more than one potential successor. And I would say in the grocery industry, this happens all the time. That there are that succession from pretty much from day one is part of what's looked at, like constant refresh. How do we renew? Who's coming next in this role? And so, Steve, share more about what you are
Yeah.
doing right now because someone said, can Steve even take a vacation? Steve needs to take a
Yeah.
vacation and Steve needs to be able to retire, right? Like, what does
Yeah.
Steve need to set up so that he can eventually take a long vacation? So tell us more about what you're doing, Steve, at your co-op right now to prepare for this.
Yeah, I think my proximity to retirement is probably driving this more a little bit, but and the conversations that are going on around the national co-op grocers, um, as more and more of my peer group, my age-related peer group are retiring and moving on to other pastures, as it were. Um, I'm fortunate enough, I have a very strong leadership team or management team here at my co-op. With the exception of one. They've all been here for at least 7 or 10 years. Some of them, one of them since we opened, along with myself. Um, and I've always had a designated emergency GM successor. It's one of our executive limitations that we have to have an emergency GM successor. And that policy kind of outlines what skills they need to have and what knowledge they need to have about working with the board, policy governance and operations and retail concepts, merchandising, and things like that. Um, that kind of started out as the guide. And the person that I had designated as our emergency GM successor kind of let me know that they were okay with being the emergency GM successor, but they probably didn't want my job if I left, if I retired, because I started saying, "Hey, I'm getting, I've got some years left here, but I'm starting to look at an exit strategy here." And they said they really probably didn't have that many years left themselves, and they weren't interested in that. So I started thinking about the other two. We have one, our office administrator, who interestingly enough had previously been our board president, who when we announced that position was opening up 8 years ago, he said, "I'm interested in applying for that job." And I said, "Well, you have to resign as the board president or resign from the board in order to apply for the job." And he did. And we interviewed a lot of good candidates, but he was the best one and had the most familiarity and qualifications for the job. So he's one of the candidates. And the other one is a younger, the marketing manager is one of those that has only been here in the role for 3 or 4 years. And she is very enthusiastic about co-ops and has a lot of drive and lots of great ideas on new ways to operate and do things around the store and around the co-op. Has enjoyed going to the Marketing Matters conferences and goes on vacations herself with her family and friends and stops in and visits co-ops everywhere like we all do. I know it's kind of it's a blessing and a curse. But so she was in Philadelphia a week ago and brought back like lots and lots of pictures from Weaver's Way and South Philly and some other places. Anyway, so we made it a little more intentional. I took the list from uh, the my general manager responsibilities from startup, the GM multiple hats list, and the success profile, um, as well as the emergency GM successor uh, executive limitation from our policies, our governance policies, and gave each of them a copy of it. And they identified the areas that they needed work, needed to get more understanding. And so we started a real training process for both of them. One of them is probably a little bit closer and could take over within a year, within a year or two if I had to leave or decided to leave. And the other one, the marketing manager, would probably could be ready in 2 years if we really hunker down and get into this. She has taken some classes on retail operations has done is learning more about policy governance and things like that. Um, Brad is focusing more on some of the operational things and um, but has a pretty good grounding in that from other jobs that he had too. So um, it's just a way we're scheduling monthly meetings to kind of go through what the gaps are between their knowledge and skills and competencies and things like that. Working on sharing access to where all the files are, and it's inspiring me to do a little cleanup of my electronic files and documents and things like that. So it would be easy for somebody to come in and look at them and take over.
And Steve, what I'm hearing, I think what you're saying is feels like common sense. Like, of course, you would want to train more than one person that could potentially take over your role. So, right? And yet, I don't think that's
Yes.
happening. I know that's not happening at every established food co-op. So, just want to shout out that this is something like not just for individual general managers. You heard what is on Steve's plate and the hats that he has to wear, right?
Yep.
And so taking additional time to be strategic and thoughtful to be like, what are the gaps? What are the trainings? Where do they need to be in the room with community partners? Where do they need to be in the room with contract negotiations? What are all the ways to complement the skill sets? Not everyone's doing that. So just want to name
Yep.
that as a movement, there needs to be more support and pressure, I would say, on
Yep.
so that every general manager at every established food co-op is doing this to kind of like for the next generation.
Yeah. We also want to be developing potential GMs or somebody that could go off and be a GM for any of our couple of startups that we have here in Virginia. I'm looking at you, Bertha, up the road in Winchester from here. There's another group starting a co-op in Charlottesville, an hour in the other direction. So um, it would be great if there were some potential candidates right here that we could, if nothing else, send over to help support when those co-ops get up and running or in the organizational and build out remodeling the buildings and things like that to go and help set shelves and train their staff. We do a lot of shadowing and training. Right this week we actually have a deli manager from East Aurora, New York here visiting our deli for a couple of days shadowing my deli manager. So doing that kind of developing across co-ops and getting to know people at other co-ops is a good way, because a lot of times our experience has been trying to hire somebody to come here for a position that we have available. Um, the people don't want to leave wherever it is that they are. And I think there's just a lack of familiarity with all the other co-ops. So
Yeah, and Steve, some of the things you were mentioning, job shadowing, right, are also there's new attention and effort being put in this from National Co-op Grocers, right? Thinking about they are very intentionally putting into their plan and their budget for this year of like bringing other managers beside GMs to go to training. And part of this is for succession readiness. So, right, there needs to be more training and support. Investing also, NCG is helping to align investing in mentorship and job shadowing. They offer 5 keys for new GMs training. And I think they're Chris Dilly from Food Co-op Initiative is in conversation with them about making that more broadly available. And then in the future, they are also working on developing an online assessment tool and developing more of a training for board GM relationship, which I know we're bringing this to a close soon and wanted to make sure that we're also talking about, okay, so the board GM relationship is one of those things that a need, right? Develop a better training for startup boards about how to support your GM effectively. And that is something that is each piece of resources that FCI develops, the new framework, building out stage 5. What does stage 5 look like? All of these are going to be supportive in this need to better support you all as startup boards when you are going to prepare to how to bring on your GM and how to partner with them effectively to build the right relationship so that they will stick around. And so I would say, if I were in a startup organizer role right now, go to all the FCI trainings you can. For real, this stuff did not exist. FCI existed, but it was nowhere near this amount of resources. Like Go to all the trainings. Get someone from your board or leadership team to go so that you're getting as much, you're flexing that muscle and building up as much expertise as possible. That you are investing in your governance area of work. Governance is sexy. I promise you, I will always say that. It is a way to enshrine your founding organizing principles and values into your organization for way long after you die, right? Like, and neglecting to focus on governance and having someone lead that that area of work will set you up to fail. Like it does. It has. Um, so please don't neglect that whole area of work. We talked about job shadowing, right? Like be very proactive when you have a new general manager of calling everyone and their brother that you know or asking who should we connect them with so that they are feeling supported. And then I put in there redefining what is the GM role? Like how do we make it so that it's not that endless list that Steve said, which he's probably forgetting at least a dozen things, right? So like as a movement, it's something we need to wrestle with. We are supposed to be an alternative model that puts people over profit. Well, one of those people is the GM. That doesn't feel what Steve's talking about. I'm like, how do you do it, Steve? You could not, like, it would be very hard. I have two young kids. There's no way I could do that job. So, how do we reckon as a movement and center adjusting for that to be like, we don't want this role to tax people to the point where they are burned out and leave, right? So how do we adjust that? And that's an all of us movement. We need to keep working on it. So this is an unsolved mystery. Um, it's, we don't, it is a crisis as a movement. Hopefully some of the things that Steve and I brought up and JQ today will fuel you with ideas. Maybe you're right in it, living it now, being like, God damn, where are the GMs? Where are all the GMs, right? But as a movement, kind of, please, we need everyone's ideas and everyone's work on figuring out like, how do we address this? And you're in it in a better time in that it's at least being explicitly talked about more and recognized more. And there are more people that are like, this is a top priority. It is bubbling to the surface more. So this is an opportunity for change to happen. And I wish we could have a tight little package with a bow on top and be like, here is the solution. But we're gonna build that together. So I'm gonna stop. JQ, do you want?
Yep, I'm gonna replace. All right. Thank you so much to Steve and Bonnie for being here and sharing their experience and wisdom. And there's so much that we barely got to touch on. The chat was ungodly lively. Lots of conversation, sharing potential solutions with each other. And, this is one conversation of many needs to happen. And like Bonnie pointed out, I first want to thank our sponsors. By the way, I go say this every time, but this isn't just thanking the sponsors. These are our fellow cooperators who believe in what we do. And one way they can forward the movement is by making sure this series is free. And they do that from the depth of their cooperative hearts. So please do notice who makes this possible. Thank them and find out who they are if you don't know who some of these are. These are all phenomenal organizations. But this conversation needs to continue, and it does throughout the series. Who holds the holder, preventing GM burnout and startup co-ops with Gabby, and then her name's Gabby Davis. Gabby actually is doing a whole bunch of surveys with GMs about why the job's untenable, what they're up against, and she's bringing that information to say, how do we prevent burnout? And so this is the first time she's presenting her research, and she's going to continue this research and be presenting it throughout the year at several co-op events. So it's going to be really fascinating. Especially recommend this one for the GMs around the call too. I think it'll be interesting to hear what your peers are saying about the situation in an anonymous format where we can all be very honest. And if you are a current GM or a past GM and want to participate in that, email me. Gabby is still taking responses to that research. And then we also, as Bonnie said, we have this conversation happening next week. We couldn't fit it on the same day, where Bonnie and I are going to talk about that transition from being a working board to a transitional board to a governing board and the relationship with the GM through that and what we're learning about that. Again, not a fully solved mystery, maybe slightly more solved than this one, but not a fully solved one, and we'll be discussing that. Also, though, today there was a lot of discussion about infra, about NCG in the chat. Supplier and support options for retail food co-ops is happening this afternoon with Chris Dilly from FCI, and he's going over exactly that. What is a supplier? What is a support organization? And what do these different, or what do you want to find out about what these different organizations do and the things they could offer? He's got a really great chart you're going to want to see. So if you can join us for that, we would love to have you there. And thank you everyone for being a part of the session